There is a document in the collections of the Colorado School of Mines that is catalogued under the heading of routine field correspondence. It is not marked sensitive. It is not sealed. It sits in a folder with a handwritten label and a date and a name, and it has not been cited in any published work on the history of Colorado mining that this researcher has been able to locate. The document is a surveyor's field report submitted in late 1873 by a British geologist working under contract for a London-backed mining syndicate operating in the Colorado Territory. His name was Edmund Graves. The report describes, in the clipped professional language of a Victorian engineer, the discovery of structures underground in a district that would not be officially opened for commercial mining for another 15 years. Not natural formations, not collapsed cavities, structures, cut stone, worked passages, evidence of prior extraction activity on a scale that Graves, a man who had worked mines in Cornwall, in South Africa, and in the copper districts of Chile, said he had never encountered in any active or abandoned site he had previously surveyed. The report runs to 11 pages. 7 of those pages describe the discovery in detail. The last 4 pages are a summary of Graves's recommendations. He recommended that the syndicate halt operations, document the site independently, and notify the Territorial Geological Authority. He submitted the report in November of 1873. The syndicate's response, preserved in a separate document filed in the same folder and written by a director in London, is dated January of 1874. It is 2 sentences long. It instructs Graves to cease further investigation of the structures, to destroy his field sketches, and to sign a confidentiality agreement as a condition of receiving the remainder of his contracted payment. There is no record of what Graves did with the sketches. There is a signed confidentiality agreement in the folder. He needed the money. The report itself survived because Graves kept a copy, and the copy entered the Colorado School of Mines collection decades after his death, through the estate of a nephew who did not know what he had. That is how these things survive, not because someone protected them, because someone forgot to destroy them. To understand what Graves found, you have to understand the landscape he was working in. The Colorado Territory in 1873 was not uninhabited frontier. It was land that had been occupied, contested, traded, and fought over for generations before Anglo-American prospectors arrived with their survey equipment and their investment capital. The Ute people had been in the Southern Rockies for centuries. They knew the mountain geography with an intimacy that the British syndicate's geologists, however technically skilled, could not match. And what the Ute knew about the specific district where Graves was working in 1873 is itself part of this record, though a part that has been handled very carelessly. In the settler accounts collected in the 1860s and 1870s by journalists and government agents documenting the Ute in advance of what everyone understood was coming, displacement and treaty and eventually removal, there are consistent references to specific areas of the Southern Rockies that the Ute described as already occupied. Not occupied by rival tribes, occupied by something older, something that had been there before. The phrase that appears in at least 3 separate collected accounts in different voices and through different translators is a version of this. The mountain had already given what it had to give. Different words, same meaning. The extraction had already happened. Someone else had already been there. Graves was not the first person to go underground in that district. He was the first person to go underground and write it down in a language that got filed rather than forgotten. The district itself is worth examining closely because the geology is unusual in ways that become significant once you understand what Graves found. The Southern Rockies in this region are part of a complex volcanic sequence. The rock types shift dramatically over short distances. Intrusive formations, hydrothermal alteration zones, sections of unusually concentrated mineral deposition sitting inside matrices of harder country rock. The kind of geological complexity that, in a conventional mining context, would mean erratic ore distribution and difficult extraction conditions. What Graves's report describes, and this is one of its most striking features, is that the existing passages he encountered followed the ore-bearing formations with a precision that his own survey work could not have improved on. The ancient miners, whoever they were, had not dug randomly. They had followed the geology, they understood the rock, they knew where the valuable material was, and they went directly to it, through formations of varying hardness, through sections of the mountain that would have required substantial effort to penetrate, with a consistency that implied either extraordinary geological knowledge or a method of identifying ore bodies that we do not associate with any pre-contact culture documented in the historical record. Graves makes this point in the report. He writes, and I am quoting from the document as transcribed by the researcher who located it, that the passages showed evidence of a systematic approach to ore identification that exceeded what his own team had been able to achieve with modern instrumentation in 3 months of surface survey. The ancient passages led directly to the highest grade material in the formation. His team had been circling it for weeks. The physical characteristics of what Graves found matter enormously because physical characteristics are what separate documented evidence from speculation. The first passage his crew broke into was approximately 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. The walls had been dressed, not pecked, not roughly shaped, dressed. The surfaces were worked to a consistent planarity that Graves described as comparable to finished masonry. In the volcanic rock of this formation, achieving that surface requires sustained, controlled abrasion with a material harder than the rock itself. The tools required to produce it leave characteristic marks. Graves looked for those marks. He found them. He could not identify the implement that had produced them. He had worked mines on 3 continents. He could not identify the tool. The passage extended beyond the range of his lanterns in 2 directions. His crew explored approximately 200 feet in each direction before the passage dimensions began to change and the condition of the wall shifted from dressed stone to what appeared to be a transitional zone, still worked but less finished, suggesting either a boundary between different phases of construction or a limit of the original builder's area of principal interest. At 2 points within the explored section, the passage opened into chambers. The larger of these, which Graves measured at roughly 30 feet by 20 feet, had features that his report describes with unusual care. There were channels cut into the floor along the base of the walls. Graves interpreted these as drainage. They ran toward a central point in the chamber where a circular depression, approximately 3 feet in diameter and 18 inches deep, had been cut into the bedrock. This is not a natural feature. You do not get a geometrically circular depression of consistent depth cut into volcanic rock by any geological process. Someone made that. Someone made it for a reason, and the reason was functional. The drainage channels converged on it. Whatever happened in that chamber produced fluid, and the fluid was managed. That is the infrastructure of a working space. That is engineering. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment, if you have not found it yet, go there now. Because what I just described is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different locations, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence. Discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It is in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. The second chamber Graves describes was smaller, approximately 15 feet square. It is the more disturbing of the two for reasons that have nothing to do with the supernatural and everything to do with what was on the walls. Graves describes, in the careful language of a man trying not to overstate, a series of markings cut into the dressed stone surface. He describes them as geometric. He describes them as repeating with internal consistency, meaning whatever the system was, it followed rules. He describes them as arranged in what appeared to be rows horizontal covering a section of wall approximately 8 feet wide and 5 feet high. He does not claim to understand what they are. He is a mining surveyor, not an archaeologist. He does not call them writing. He calls them marks, and he says he copied several of them into his field sketches before the syndicate's instruction arrived requiring him to destroy those sketches. The sketches are gone. The description survives. What Graves recorded in that description is consistent with one specific thing: a system of information. Not decoration, not random scratching. A system, regular, intentional, covering a defined area. In a chamber underground in the Southern Rockies, in rock that the physical evidence suggests was worked before any civilization that mainstream archaeology credits with literacy in the Western Hemisphere had yet formed. That is the problem. That is the problem that the syndicate's director in London did not want Edmund Graves talking about. The response pattern here is worth examining carefully because it tells you something about how these things worked. The syndicate was not a government, it was a private investment vehicle. Its interest was profit, not discovery. An anomalous archaeological find underground in an active mining district represented, from their perspective, a straightforward commercial risk, regulatory attention, possible work stoppages, scientific access demands, legal questions about ownership and excavation rights. The instruction to Graves was not ideologically motivated, it was economically motivated. Destroy the sketches, sign the agreement, take the payment, and let us get on with finding the gold. What is interesting, and what the conventional economic explanation does not fully account for, is that this same response pattern appears consistently across multiple unrelated operators in multiple districts across the American West in the same general period. The Cripple Creek incidents, the Galena formations, the documented gaps in survey records from the Arizona Territory in the 1880s. Private operators with no coordinating relationship making the same decision in the same sequence. Discovery, documentation, suppression, resumption. The most straightforward explanation is that the suppression was independently rational in each case. Every operator reached the same conclusion for the same reasons. The less comfortable explanation is that there was a shared understanding of how such things were to be handled, an informal protocol passed through the networks of investors and engineers who moved between these projects that made the decision feel less like a choice and more like a standard procedure. The two explanations are not mutually exclusive, and both of them are disturbing in different ways for what they imply about how much has been lost. Let's spend some time on the mathematics of what Graves found, because the numbers make an argument that the physical description alone cannot fully convey. The passage Graves explored was 6 feet by 4 feet in cross-section. He explored approximately 400 feet of it. That is a volume of excavated rock in hard volcanic formation of roughly 9,600 cubic feet, and that was only the section his team reached before conditions changed. The passage extended beyond his exploration range in both directions. The chambers add additional volume. If the full passage system extended even half a mile in total, which is a conservative estimate for a purposeful mine workings in a rich ore district, the total excavated volume approaches or exceeds 100,000 cubic feet of volcanic rock removed, dressed, and in the principal passage sections finished to masonry grade surface quality. Think about what that requires. You need people, a lot of them working over a sustained period. You need tools capable of cutting and dressing volcanic rock at depth. You need light because the passages are underground. You need air management because deep passages in hard rock accumulate carbon dioxide and reduce oxygen to lethal levels without active ventilation. You need food and water for the workforce. You need a surface operation to manage the extracted rock. And you need, critically, a reason. You do not excavate 100,000 cubic feet of hard volcanic rock, finish the walls, cut drainage systems, and cover the interior with a systematic marking scheme unless what you are doing has a purpose that justifies the investment. Someone was extracting something from that formation. The geological evidence that Graves observed, the passage following ore-bearing zones with surgical precision, tells you what they were extracting, the same thing the syndicates of 1873 were looking for. But they had been there first, and they had been systematic about it in a way that the 1873 operations could not match, because whatever instrument they had used to identify and follow the ore through the rock, Edmund Graves could not find the marks it left and could not identify the tool from its traces. That is not a minor detail. That is a significant problem for the conventional picture of what was technologically possible in this part of the world before European contact. Now here is where the Tartaria framework enters the conversation and where we need to be precise about what is documented and what is inferred. The Tartaria concept, as it circulates in independent research and alternative history communities, proposes the existence of a pre-catastrophe civilization or network of civilizations possessing technological and organizational capacities substantially beyond what mainstream archaeology attributes to pre-industrial cultures. In its more extreme forms, it becomes a unified conspiracy theory. In its more disciplined form, it is asking a legitimate question. Is the conventional picture of human civilization's development in the Americas accurate? The Graves report, combined with the Ute oral accounts of prior occupation, combined with the specific technical characteristics of what was found underground, contributes to a pattern that the disciplined version of this question is trying to account for. The pattern is this. Across the American West, in the period from roughly 1860 to 1910, private commercial operators working underground encountered evidence of prior industrial activity at depths and in geological formations inconsistent with any documented pre-contact culture's technological capacity. The accounts share consistent characteristics: worked stone to close tolerances, systematic passage layouts following ore-bearing geology, drainage infrastructure, absence of conventional artifacts, and in several cases, marking systems of unknown origin on interior walls. The accounts also share a consistent aftermath: brief documentation, silence, resumption of commercial activity. The 1873 Graves report is one of the cleanest examples of this pattern because it includes a named observer, a surviving document, a specific location, and a documented suppression mechanism. You can trace it. Most of these cases you cannot. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. Everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. Pinned comment now, then come back. What the Graves report cannot tell us, and what we have to be honest about, is who built those passages. We have a description, we have measurements, we have a technical assessment from a qualified observer. We do not have identity. We do not have a name for the civilization or the culture. We do not have their tools, their texts, their material culture in any form that has been connected to this site. We have the holes in the rock and the marks on the wall and the drainage channel in the floor, and a syndicate director's decision to make sure that was all we ever had. This is actually consistent with what we know about how certain kinds of civilizations leave archaeological signatures. A civilization that was primarily extractive rather than settlement-based, that moved between resource sites, that operated through maritime and overland trade networks rather than through fixed territorial occupation, leaves a different kind of record than a civilization that builds cities. It leaves workings. It leaves tools at the site. It leaves occasionally systems of notation on the walls of chambers where some kind of accounting or record keeping was necessary. It does not leave temples, palaces, residential districts, agricultural systems. It leaves the infrastructure of extraction. And if the extraction sites are in places that later populations had commercial reasons to suppress and scientific reasons to ignore, the infrastructure stays hidden for a long time. There is a parallel in the Lake Superior copper record that researchers have begun to draw carefully but have not yet fully articulated. The ancient Lake Superior copper mines worked between roughly 5,000 and 1,000 years before the present, share several characteristics with what Graves found in the Colorado Territory in 1873. The passage systems follow mineral deposits with surgical precision. The techniques applied, fire setting, controlled extraction, systematic removal of high-grade material, imply prior knowledge rather than discovery. The Ojibwe oral tradition preserves accounts of a people who came specifically for the metal, who worked in organized groups, and who eventually left. The Colorado Territory finds are separated from Lake Superior by geography and possibly by time period. But the technical signatures are consistent: dressed stone, drainage systems, geometric marking, all following passage layouts, absence of settlement evidence. A civilization that mines does not necessarily farm. A civilization that extracts does not necessarily build permanent structures at the extraction site. If you are looking for them in the archaeological record of settlement, you will not find them. You have to look for them in the holes, and the holes, when people find them, keep getting filled back in. Let's talk about what happened to Edmund Graves after 1873, because the human dimension of this story has been almost entirely invisible. Graves signed the confidentiality agreement and received his payment. He continued working as a surveyor and geologist for several more years, taking contracts in Nevada and in the Arizona Territory before returning to England in 1879. His professional correspondence from the period between 1874 and 1879 survives in fragments, mostly in the possession of descendants who were located by a researcher in the 1990s and allowed limited access. In that correspondence, there are several references to the Colorado assignment that are notable for what they do not say. Graves discusses other assignments in detail. He discusses geological findings, contractual disputes, the difficulty of sourcing reliable equipment in remote districts. He does not discuss Colorado. In a letter to a colleague dated 1876, there is a single oblique reference, a line about a survey that produced findings for which he was not paid what he was owed. No location, no details. The confidentiality agreement was still in force, but the phrasing is careful in a way that suggests he was aware of what he had found and was choosing, consciously, not to discuss it. He had signed something. He had taken the money. And whatever he had seen underground in the Colorado Territory in the autumn of 1873 stayed with him in silence for the remaining years of his career. The copy of the report that eventually reached the Colorado School of Mines came from his nephew, who had received it as part of a collection of professional papers and had no particular sense of its significance. He donated the entire collection without inventory. Nobody looked at it carefully for decades. These are the accidents of preservation that give us what little we have. The researcher who located the Graves report in the Colorado School of Mines collection was not looking for it. She was cataloguing unclaimed donations as part of an archival organization project in the early 2000s. She noticed the document because of its date and the unusual nature of the field description, and made notes. Those notes were shared in an unpublished paper circulated through a small network of researchers interested in pre-contact evidence in the American West. The paper was never formally published. The Graves report itself was never followed up by the institution. The location it describes, identified in the report by reference to a now-defunct land survey designation, has been worked over multiple times by subsequent commercial operators and is now substantially altered. Whether any physical evidence of what Graves found remains underground in that district is unknown. Nobody has looked, not because it would be impossible to look, because nobody in a position to authorize and fund the looking has decided it was worth doing. This is the more corrosive form of suppression, not a directive from a syndicate director, not a signed agreement, just the weight of institutional indifference, which is heavier than any document and leaves less of a trace. There is a specific line in Graves's report that has stayed with me since I first read the transcript of it. He is describing the moment his crew broke through into the first passage. He writes that the air that came out when the wall gave way was cold and dry, not the damp, mineral-heavy air of an active or recently abandoned mine. Cold and dry, he writes, like something sealed. That detail is not dramatic. Graves does not treat it as dramatic. He records it as an observable fact, one sensory datum among many, but cold, dry air in a sealed underground passage in the southern Rockies means the passage had been closed for long enough that the internal environment had equilibrated. No moisture exchange, no biological activity. The seal had held. Whatever had closed that passage had closed it effectively, and had closed it based on the physical evidence of what was inside a very long time ago. When Graves and his crew broke through, they were the first people to breathe that air in a very long time, maybe a few hundred years, maybe much longer. The cold, dry air does not know. It was just waiting in the dark in the sealed passage with the dressed walls and the drainage channels and the geometric marks for someone to arrive and notice. Graves noticed. He wrote it down. His employer made him sign a piece of paper. And the passage was sealed again, this time by the ordinary processes of commercial mining, by redirected drifts and backfilled sections, and the accumulation of a century and a half of excavation and collapse. What was there is almost certainly gone now. What Graves saw is in the report. The report is in the archive. And the question of who built those passages, who cut that stone to masonry tolerances, who made those marks on the wall, who sealed it and walked away, has not been answered. It has barely been asked. The mountain had already given what it had to give. Someone had been there before. Edmund Graves found the evidence, and then he signed a piece of paper and went to Nevada and never spoke of it again.